Today we're going to look at branding. Now we're all familiar with what a brand is. We know all the brands, we can see them here on the slides. And so we're very familiar with the concept of brands. But how are they built? How are brands created? Why is there value in having a brand? If we look, for a brand, for the manufacturer, it represents an ownership. It tells everybody whose it is, what it is, and where it came from. It also allows us to distinguish it from our competitors, and it adds complete value over non-branded or say generic type products. But for the consumer, there's also a benefit. It delivers a promise. We know exactly what we're going to get when we are purchasing a brand. And there's also that level of consistency that we're looking for every time we buy the product. For example, if you walk out today, go to McDonald's, order a Big Mac, a fry, and a drink, consume it, get on a plane, fly to New York, order a Big Mac, a fry, and a drink, they're going to be relatively the same because that is what a brand is telling us, that there is a promise of this is what we're going to deliver every time you buy. So if we look at some of the other differences between a product and a brand, a product is made strictly in a factory, where a brand is created through the marketing efforts. A product can be easily duplicated. You can copy a product over and over again through different manufacturers can create a product that has no branding on it, and we may not be able to tell much difference between them. But a brand, on the other hand, is very unique. The brand has a personality as well and is also timeless. A brand, if managed properly, is going to continue on through time. Think about one of the oldest brands in America. It's something that a lot of women cherish, especially the little blue box that it comes in, and I'm talking about Tiffany jewelry. Tiffany has been around for a very long time, and it is continuously updated, the element and the aspect of its brand, but it still retains that aspect of quality that has been very valued with it. So if we look at brands, brands also create a lot of other things for us. Take, for example, let's look at two different products. Look at Johnson's baby powder and Walgreens baby powder. Now both of these are relatively the same. And I'm not talking just relatively same, I'm pretty much talking exactly the same. There is no difference between what's inside that product. It's talc. The only other difference between the two, about $1.50. Brands also have a higher perceived quality about them. When we have no idea, no information on a particular product category, and we're asked to choose between purchasing one product and purchasing a brand, we will look at the brand as having higher quality. It may not have that quality, but we perceive that primarily through the development of brands. We'll also pay higher prices for a branded product. Now, also branded products will have a greater market share than a non-branded product or a store brand or generic brand. Also, higher margins are created. Now, this is one of those things that is very, that's changing a little bit. For the retailer, a retailer will make more margin on their private label brand than they will on a branded product. But for the manufacturers, a manufacturer can get higher margin by having a branded product than those that are selling or manufacturing for a retailer a generic brand. A branded product also allows me to create brand extensions, as we're going to see later in this lecture. According to the American Marketing Association, or the AMA, a brand is defined as a name, term, sign, symbol, or design, or a combination of all these, intended to identify the goods or services of one seller or group of sellers and to differentiate them from those of other competitors. What we're looking at here is that we're trying to understand that the brand is more than just the name. A brand is a little bit of everything that marketing is putting into it to help distinguish it from others. Some of the other roles that brands take on from the consumer perspective is that it allows us to identify the source and maker. But one of the things that's also most important is the ability for it to simplify our decision making. Imagine, if you will, you walk into a retailer, Walmart or something similar to this, and you're going to the toothpaste aisle. Imagine if all of them just had no names on it. It was maybe a very generic, basic name. How do you determine between all those different brands which one to buy? Because we have a brand, consumers can walk in, they've built a level of loyalty, and they are purchasing the same brand over and over again because it's easier. It makes it much simpler for us to be able to choose one versus another because we have established that loyalty in our head, which comes from branding. So again, that allows us to reduce the risk of making bad decisions, and it also just makes life a little easier for us. On the flip side, think about what it is from a marketer's perspective. Again, brands make product handling much easier. Could you imagine walking into the buyer for Walmart or Meijer or any other retailer trying to sell them your brand or my brand, Mike's brand? Or who are they going to see first, Mike's brand or Procter & Gamble? Because they know, because they trust, because they have that relationship already, it makes things a lot easier. Brands also allow us to create loyalty with our customers, as we just talked about. And maybe more importantly, it establishes a barrier to entry for other competitors trying to come into a marketplace. If there's a strong, dominant brand, it's very hard for any new company to try to get traction into the marketplace. In developing a brand, part of the things that we have to do for our consumer to get them to trust and to buy our product is we have to create and deliver on a brand promise. Now, a brand promise is the marketer's version of what the brand must be and do for the consumers. But consumers will decide, based on what they think and feel about the brand, if they will accept anything that we tell them. So oftentimes we're going to establish our branding based on the benefits that our product is going to offer, or also we could do it based on the emotional aspect. We talked a lot about this in segmentation, targeting, and positioning earlier. But it's the emotional aspect that's becoming more and more prevalent today because we are looking to establish as consumers a relationship or some type of trust in a brand. For example,
here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
have you ever heard the term, "your name is mud"? Where does this come from? Well, if we look back in history to April 1865, Washington, D.C., Ford's Theater, President Lincoln and his wife were watching a play when John Wilkes Booth, an actor, walked up behind the president, shot him, and then jumped off stage, breaking his leg. He hobbled from the theater, finding eventually somebody that would set his leg, a doctor. John Wilkes Booth was eventually captured, hung for his crimes, but the doctor that helped Booth was a doctor named Mudd. And ever since then, that term, mud, has become synonymous with something nefarious. Could you imagine today that if you were trying to get into the financial services sector and your last name was Madoff, the brand is gone of that name. So the thing is, if you don't understand it, think about if you don't brand yourself today, Google's going to do it for you. Keep in mind that brands are not built by advertising alone. Customers learn about brands from a variety of contact and touch points with the company. It could be personal observation and use, word of mouth, interaction with company personnel, any type of experience, whether it be online or through telephone. Anything that we have a contact with a brand is going to influence how we think about that brand. Imagine you're driving down the road and a truck that has a brand name on it cuts you off. You remember that. Does it influence how you perceive the brand? If you're loyal to the company, I would say not. But if you have never established loyalty, the next time you would go to buy that product category, you may remember that aspect. So in this case, everything matters. That's why everybody in an organization has to be involved in making sure that all of our efforts are valued. Everything that we see with a product, a brand if you will, is part of the brand element that is going to be built around that brand. And brand elements are any type of a device which can be trademarked that identify and differentiate the brand. Most strong brands employ multiple brand elements. For example, Nike has the distinctive swoosh logo and the empowering just do it slogan. And of course the Nike name, which is from the Greek winged goddess of victory. But everything, whether it be a jingle, a package, signs, spokespeople, everything has an impact. And that's where marketers have to work to make sure that every touch point, every element that we see of a brand is connected well. For example, part of the brand elements are different characters that we could use to link to our brand. You know, you think about the M&Ms or the Pillsbury Doughboy. These are things that we can still imagine, I'm sure in your head, that finger coming out and poking the Pillsbury Doughboy in the stomach. These things just matter to us. And other things, think about the spokespeople. I mean, we have Flo, we have the world's most interesting man, we have Michael Jordan, and I probably shouldn't use the last one, Jared from Subway, since of his current legal troubles. But spokespeople, we make a connection with.
Last look at this brave pioneer who will not be returning.
His only regret is not knowing what regret feels like. He is the most interesting man in the world.
His trip to Mars is only one way.
Adios, amigo.
Stay thirsty, my friend.
Think about the packaging of products that we buy today. Oftentimes, these touch points are ways for us to be able to connect and understand what's inside that product. Think about the blue Tiffany box or any Apple device that you buy and you unpack. They put a lot of effort, Apple does, into the packaging of their product. They want to make it an experience, not just something that's going to hold and protect a product during shipping. It's a little bit more than that with Apple. Think about the slogans that marketers come up with to attach to their brands. Oftentimes these can have very powerful messages for us. For example, if you look at these 6 brands that are on the screen, think about what their slogan is. Can you remember all of them? For many of you, I was going to say yes. There may be a couple that may be difficult. For example, De Beers. Their slogan? A diamond is forever. Nike, as we mentioned before, just do it. Hallmark, the greeting card company, theirs is when you care enough to send the very best. KFC, finger looking good. The Volkswagen Beetle, when it came out, their slogan captured on the part about what it was. Their slogan, think small. IMAX, on the other hand, think big. So when we're creating brand elements, some of the choices that we have to make, we need to allow for them to be able to build the brand. To do so, brand elements should be memorable, meaningful, and likable. We also must make sure that our elements are also defendable. That will help us leverage and preserve brand equity against all challengers. To do so, marketers must ensure that brand elements are also transferable, adaptable, and protectable. We want to be able to, if we build ourselves into a box of what our brand is going to be, with our brand name or with any of the brand elements that we use, we may be limited in our growth. Think about Netflix. Netflix started out, they would send you a DVD by mail, or 2 or 3, however, whatever package you ordered. So why didn't they call it DVD by mail? They called it Netflix because they understood they needed that growth element, because they saw where the market was going to, that we were going to be streaming more and more of our videos into the future. Brand elements should be easy to recall as well, descriptive, and should be in many ways persuasive. A good brand element will play a role in building a brand. For low involvement products, such as cookies and chips and things like this, we have to make sure that our brand elements are very easy to recall. For example, the Keebler Elves reinforce that home-style baking and sense of magic and fun. That's one of the things that they're trying to do. Likeable brand elements, such as slogans or characters, can lead to higher awareness of our product, and it can also help us capture intangible characteristics that may be more difficult with traditional means. Let's think about cuties. In 1969, Sun Pacific was founded with about 72 acres of oranges. Today they have over 20,000 acres and have expanded to include kiwis, grapes, and other fruits. Cuties were first introduced to the market in early 2000s on the West Coast, but became a national brand in 2011 using a $20 million ad campaign that allowed Cuties to brand what was before a perceived commodity, an orange or a mandarin orange. Since that time, they have launched multiple line extensions such as juices, other types of juices, smoothies, anything that they can attach to that brand. Part of what happens when we're trying to build a brand, especially for certain types of products, is being able to build a brand community. And when we think about a brand community, you can look at the Harley Owners Group, or the HOGs. This is a group of bikers, of course, and they share a similar type of connection and rituals that they all have, not just their love affair with their bikes, but they also help each other. For example, if one is looking for a part, they can talk to each other and find out maybe where they could track down the certain part or equipment that they're looking for. Other companies have also been able to establish brand communities, maybe not as strong. For example, you had the Saturn cars. They had, every year they would have what was called the drive-in into their plant in Tennessee. Now, give or take how the quality of a Saturn car, it built a sense of community among all the owners, and once you're inside a community, you're never going to want to leave it. Could you imagine a Harley owner that has been riding Harleys forever, part of this great brand community, switching to a Yamaha or a Vespa even? It's just not going to happen if they can keep it from happening. Some of the newest research into branding has been using what we call functional MRI machines. And these have been able to allow researchers to put, a subject inside an fMRI and show them pictures of brands to see what part of their brains are lighting up. So what we're looking for in trying to understand brands is what happens when a consumer is exposed to a brand. Does the mere exposure, does it stimulate us or cause some type of action to occur? There was a study not long ago where a researcher at a university in the Northeast showed pictures of individual students around campus, and they were sitting on maybe a bench reading a book, or they were waiting in line for a movie pass or something that individuals were doing on campus. Inside half of those pictures, though, somewhere, not very prominent, but a little bit obscure. Maybe if somebody's sitting on a bench reading a book, that down beside them would be a bottle of Dasani water. So the Dasani water was not very prominent, is what I mean. So what they did is they showed half of their respondents. I think they did a couple of hundred with each. So half of them got to see pictures that had the Dasani water in it. The other half showed no water. The water was nowhere in the picture at all. So they paid the respondents, I think $3 to $5 for coming in and doing this experiment. But when they left, they told them, hey, why don't you go over there and grab a bottle of water? And they had different styles of water, different brands of water. Dasani was one. They had a generic type of water. And what they found is that those that were exposed to the picture that had the Dasani bottle of water in it, now, they weren't showed these pictures for very long, 3 to 4 seconds. That's it. Those that watched the pictures with the bottled water in it chose the Dasani about 75% of the time. Those that did not see it, it was more along the lines of about 50-50. So just that mere small exposure to Dasani water's bottle somewhere in that picture created that element, and it translated into selecting that product.
Any questions?
Not bad, not bad.
Oh, it's gonna be like that, huh? Ah, someone wants to play.
Just trying to keep up with the old guy, you know?
Dude, is that your real hair?
Is that all you got? Go, go. I just can't miss today. Do you ever get days like that? Hey, Tiger, you looking? You looking?
If you want
I won't win it. How'd you do that?
You'll learn.
Some brands have even got to the part of being what we call a cult brand. These are those that have very avid followers that will continue to support and purchase the brand. For example, we know Harley owners will have a Harley tattoo. There's also been people that have had the tattoo of an Apple logo on their body, or even I've seen it cut into their hair, the Apple logo. You're not going to see this too much about Windows logo, the little window on somebody's neck or leg, or a Yamaha logo. It's generally not going to happen because the passion for that brand is not there. As we said earlier, one of the benefits of having a strong brand is being able to create brand extensions. And for example, here's some recent positive extensions. Jeep, with creating an off-road stroller, if you will, for people that wanted to go running maybe on rough terrain. It's a great connection because, again, we think about a Jeep as being rugged. Now, this next one is kind of gone out of style already because Scion was just dropped by Toyota, but they established a new brand, the Scion brand, that for a while was very successful with a certain demographic of the population. Caterpillar was also able to translate their brand name of rugged quality into a work boot. But it's not always positive. For example, Dr. Phil's Shape Up Nutrition Bars just didn't happen too well, didn't work too well. Tropicana ice cream or Maxim hair color for men just didn't go over very well. Marketers hope to turn all the work that they put into a brand into brand equity. And brand equity is developed by creating the right brand knowledge structure with the consumer. And it all depends on the brand-related context that these consumers have, whether it's done by the marketer or not. So again, we can look at three main elements of brand equity. They come from the brand elements, which we just talked about, the marketing activities, such as the product or service, and all the support programs that we put out there, but also it's on the level of secondary associations, such as how can I transfer and link my brand to some other entity, such as a person, a place, or a thing. We go back to Apple and their Think Differently. They were linking their brand to these famous people. Nike does the same thing with their athletes that they put together. But what is brand equity? We look at brand equity as the added value endowed on a product or service. It may be reflected in the way consumers think, feel, or act with respect to the brand, and it will also be reflected in the prices, market share, and profitability that the brand commands. So when we think about brand equity, here's three examples of shirts that are very similar to each other. In fact, many of them could be made in the exact same factory. We have a Ralph Lauren shirt for $150, a Cutter & Buck for $62, or a Croft & Barrow from Kohl's for $20. There may not be a lot of difference between these shirts, except for the price. Think about this example. L'Oreal, the worldwide cosmetics manufacturer, owns the brand Yves Saint Laurent. These two products are made in the same factory. everything is identical except for three things: the packaging, the location that they're sold, and the price. You're not going to expect to find a consumer that would be willing to pay $32 for the Yves Saint Laurent product to be shopping in the location such as Walmart for the L'Oreal product. This is where value comes in with that brand. The Yves Saint Laurent brand, much higher value, much higher perception than L'Oreal's brand. When we look at customer-based brand equity, though, this is basically the differential effect that the brand knowledge has on the consumer's response to the marketing efforts of the brand. These can be positive and negative. And three key elements of customer-based brand equity are the brand equity that arise from differences in consumer response, how consumers respond differently to the messages we send out there, in other words, the differences in response as a result of the consumer's brand knowledge. How do people think about, feel about the images, the experiences, the beliefs, all of these things that have been put into our mind about a product. All of these are also reflected in the perceptions and preferences that we built over a brand based on the marketing efforts that we as marketers undertake. It takes a long time to alter the big picture aspect of brand equity. Let's look at the world's 10 most valuable brands in 2009. Just look at this list for a moment. Who's missing? Apple. Apple's not even there in 2009. But thanks to their recent successes with the iPhone, the iPad, and these types of products, let's look at what has happened in just 6 short years. Apple is now number 1. This was not an accident. Part of it is the product. Great product for those Apple loyalists, but it was also their marketing efforts that put it together. It was the effort that they went through to create that image of quality, of difference, of innovation that is surrounding Apple even today. Brand equity must be managed. And to manage it, we're looking at maybe ways that we can reinforce what that brand is. So this is basically consistently conveying the brand's meaning in terms of what the product represents, what core benefit it supplies, what need it satisfies, things like this, but also how the brand makes products superior. So how does my brand do better than others? So also being able to establish in the consumer's mind what it is about the brand that we are allowed to connect on an emotional basis. But oftentimes brands get old. Brands become stale because of mismanagement. There we have to look at brand revitalization. But here we first have to understand, what is the source of brand equity? Are there positive associations that have been losing their strength or their uniqueness, mainly because of a competitor's action? Or have negative associations become linked to the brand? Once we've established what's going on, then we can create new brand positionings, or we can create new brand elements, refreshing these elements to be able to build the brand back up to where it was. We also have to think about managing the overall brand strategy. For example, we have parent brands, or master of family brands, if you will, and under those we can generate line extensions or even category extensions. For example, under a line extension, think about Tide with their regular laundry detergent. They also introduce a line extension, Tide with bleach or Tide with a fabric softener. A category extension, on the other hand, is entering into a new separate category, if you will. Take Honda. Honda is known for making great engines, and they started out with their automobiles, and then they were able to expand that into different categories such as lawn equipment, such as snowblowers, such as marine boats and things like this, where they're able to benefit from their well-established position of a quality engine into new categories. You're doing this as well with your simulation. For example, you should have introduced All Around Plus by now, which is looking at introducing something in the cold formula, in the cold market, that is going to be able to put together and grow the brand perception in that category. Later, in period 6, I believe, you're going to introduce a category extension. You're going to introduce something totally new outside, a new brand, if you will, called All Right. You're going to manage these things very differently. When making branding decisions about names, oftentimes we have to figure out, are we a house of brands or a branded house? This is basically two ends of the brand relationship continuum. A house of brand strategy is where we use individual or separate brand names for different types of categories. For example, General Mills, everything that they use has a very different name. Bisquick, Gold Medal, Wheaties, Yoplait, things like this. Where a branded house, though, they use some type of a corporate umbrella or company brand name. For example, GE. GE makes thousands and thousands of products, but every one of them have that GE name onto it somehow. The same thing we can use with a sub-branded name. For example, Kellogg's. Everything Kellogg's makes has that Kellogg's family brand on it, but they each have individual brand names, such as Kellogg's Rice Krispies, Kellogg's Frosted Flakes, Kellogg's Pop-Tarts, all of these different aspects. We must also determine what is the role that a brand is going to have for the company. We'll have different things such as a high-end prestige brand, which is a relatively high-priced brand that can, because it's high-priced, can add prestige and credibility to the entire portfolio. Think about Chevrolet and their Corvette. Okay, it's the Chevrolet Corvette. Well, that adds value to the entire line of Chevrolet. We can also use a low-end entry-level type brand, which is a relatively low-price brand in the portfolio, and it can be used to attract customers to the entire brand franchise. For example, BMW with their 3 Series automobiles are significantly lower than the traditional BMW. But once a buyer gets inside and owns a BMW 3 Series at the low end, when they get more money, start making more money, want to trade up, they typically will stay with the BMW and buy the next higher series. Flanker brands are also in a way that can be positioned with respect to the competitor's brand so that more important and also more profitable flagship brands can retain their desired positioning. We're going to talk about flankers here shortly, but again, you can look at Intel Celeron chip, Anheuser-Busch Bavarian beer. These are all types of flanker brands that are put out there, and it makes the other brands from these companies look much better. Companies can also capitalize on their reservoir of brand equity through the use of cash cows. Think about Gillette with their older razor models, such as the Track 2, the Atra Sensor, or even the latest Mach 3, latest of the cash cows for the company. They have built up so much brand equity, and people have continued to buy the Mach 3 blades, even though they have a newer, better, super faster, greater product out there already. When we think about a brand extension, one of the things to keep in mind is that between 80 and 90% of all new brand and new products launched are launched as a line extension. One reason for this is that it's less expensive to introduce a line extension because the parent brand or the main brand is already well known in the marketplace. So consumers are already familiar with the brand name, which makes things a lot easier. It helps you improve the odds of new product success, especially if you have a very strong parent brand. But there's also some disadvantages with this type of strategy. If you can dilute your brand by adding too many different line extensions, you can confuse the market with it. And if something happens negatively to that line extension, it can damage the parent brand. There's also the aspect of cannibalization, which you talked about or was covered in your simulation. But you can do great things with line extensions, especially if you have a powerful brand. Think about Crayola. Crayola has been able to take their colored crayons, generally wax, and expand that into so many different products out there that all relate to the art business, if you will. There are many different strategies when it comes to creating a brand name. Oftentimes we can use a functional or descriptive name such as IBM, International Business Machines, or BMW, Bavarian Motor Works. When you know these brands, you know exactly what type of product that they're selling. But we can also create something that's evocative, something that stands out, such as Yahoo or Virgin. If you think about Yahoo, what does it mean? Well, it's something that is related to some type of cry, if you will. Yahoo, I discovered it, or whatever. But it also has a meaning. Yahoo basically means you always have other options. We can invent a name, such as what Google or Nike did. All these words were out there in the lexicon of the world, if you will. they also had to be created a new type of meaning for what is Google? What does it mean for a search engine? We can also create an experiential nature with our brand name. Think about Red Bull. I mean, if you're looking at an energy drink, Red Bull stands for something. It means something, high energy. Could you imagine if they called it Pink Unicorns? Brands grow just as children do. And it's the brand manager's responsibility to take the role similar to that of a parent by providing the resources and protection that is needed for this brand to grow from infancy all the way into maturity. And because brands are the most important asset that a company ever owns, managers should focus on the long-term growth of the brand. The key factor in managing brands is not advertising. It's about managing the experience that the consumer, the members of the target market, are going to have with the brand. You do this through creating a consistent brand message. As I said, managing your brand requires a lot of efforts on managers' part. And oftentimes, how managers in companies react in time of a crisis is going to have a great impact on the consumer's perception of the brand. For example, in 1982, 7 people in Chicago died after taking extra-strength Tylenol capsules. Upon learning of the death, Johnson & Johnson was faced with not only the death of these 7 people, but they were also involved in trying to manage the crisis that was brewing around their company. Johnson & Johnson immediately put out warnings about the product. They halted production and stopped all advertisements that were engaged for Tylenol. A week later, the company initiated a nationwide recall of over 300 million bottles, which cost them it was a retail value of about $100 million. They went even further by putting out ads urging consumers not to consume any product that contained Tylenol. At the time, they didn't know what had happened. Tylenol saw their market share drop from about 35% down to basically nothing. However, because of how they managed the process, within a year after it was introduced, Tylenol was back to the same level it was before. But within 3 years, Tylenol became the most popular over-the-counter pain medication. It turns out there was nothing that Tylenol had done wrong. A woman in Chicago wanted to poison her husband. She took apart the capsule, put cyanide inside it, put it back into the bottle, stuck it in their medicine cabinet. He took it and eventually died. She wanted to cover her tracks and probably earn a few bucks at the same time, so she went all over the Chicago area, taking the product off the shelf, replacing it with one that had had a cyanide capsule put inside it, and put it back on the shelves. That's where other people bought it and then eventually died. But if you counter this would happen, think about when the Firestone and Ford Explorer debacle came out. They were each pointing fingers at each other. No, it's not our fault, it's them, and it hurt both brands. So while we don't have that big of an issue in the US, counterfeit products have also caused a lot of trouble for companies. There have been many successful brands in Asia that are under constant threat from counterfeit products. And oftentimes that leads to the brand being forever lost. There was a well-known food case in China years ago about children who were drinking a nationwide brand of milk suddenly developed a lot of kidney problems. Some of them were hospitalized, some of them lost both their kidneys, some of them even died. Come to find out that there was an unscrupulous businessman in China that found a way to counterfeit the milk using almost identical bottles, identical packaging. They painted the trucks to look identical for delivery, but they were substandard product, and this caused all the problems with the kids. Eventually, the Chinese government found this culprit, and well, I guess what the Chinese do, they executed him very quickly. However, the national brand was gone. It will no longer be in existence because no parent is going to trust that product for their children. But we also have to worry about the aspect of our brand becoming genericized. And when we think about a genericized brand, what we're looking at is what happens when a brand becomes so synonymous with the brand category. Look at these brand names here. Yo-Yo used to be Dunkin's brand name for their product. Now anybody that makes this type of product, the little toy on a string, can call it a yo-yo. Why? Because the public became so used to using that term yo-yo, nobody's brand could able to establish anything other than being called a yo-yo. Bayer aspirin. Well, aspirin used to be Bayer's brand name. No longer. Anybody can make aspirin today. So if we look, what are these? Well, if we look up at the top left, you might think, oh, those are Kleenex. Well, in reality, those are facial tissues. Then we have not Q-tips, we have cotton swabs. It's not a Band-Aid, it's an adhesive strip. And finally, we have lip balm, not chapstick. Meg Whitman, the former CEO of HP, was quoted as saying, when people use your brand as a verb, that's remarkable. And that's true. I mean, it's a wonderful thing. Think about all the benefit that Google got because people use it. Hey, go Google it. No matter which search engine, because it came synonymous with doing a search online. However, one of the things that companies have to do is they must be able to protect their brand to make sure that it does not become genericized. In this day and time, it's probably unlikely that any brand's going to lose their ability to keep that brand name. However, you must take protection. For example, Kleenex, one of the things that they do very well is they put out a lot of advertisements saying, please don't use Kleenex whenever you use the term Kleenex, make sure you're calling it Kleenex brand facial tissue. That's their way of being able to protect Kleenex. Could you imagine what would happen if Kleenex was no longer allowed to use that as their brand? You could have today Puffs Kleenex because it becomes synonymous with tissues. Now, the last couple of things. First, I want to talk about flanker brands. And we talked about that earlier, where we could have a brand that's going to be able to put together, I guess, kind of a defensive move against some of our competitors. Think about Marriott. Marriott used a different form of flanker brands. They weren't really doing it defensively or to go against competitors. They just moved up and down the entire hotel chain line, if you will. Starting at the middle with Marriott, the large hotels downtown, 50, 60 floors. They branched out to the suburbs with Courtyards by Marriott. They branched up with the Renaissance or the Ritz-Carlton, all the way up to the Vlugari Hotel and Resort. There's only about 8 of those in the world, but your average night stay is going to be about $10,000, $12,000. The other aspect to look at is what we call fighter brands. With a fighter brand, think about Tostitos. When it came into the marketplace, it captured an enormous amount of the market. Okay? They're selling the product for about $2.99 each, but then all of a sudden you had these lower level store or generic brands come in about 99 cents or even to $1.49. A lot of people started moving from Tostitos all the way down to the tortilla chips that were, very inexpensive. So how do I manage this? Well, this is where we create a fighter brand. And a fighter brand is one that you can look at with Santitas. Santitas are produced by Frito-Lay. They're basically a Doritos without any flavoring on them, but we put them in at roughly $1.99, and we can create a barrier, if you will, between the inexpensive brand and our top brand, the Tostitos. By doing that, a lot of the market share moved back not only to Santitos, but it moved all the way back to Tostitos.